Okay, we're going to talk about departmental costing and cost allocation. So, prior we talked about costs as they relate to volume, that relationship, fixed and variable costs, break even, et cetera, contribution margin. And now we're going to talk about costing as it applies to departments and service lines, etc. So, again, chapter 5, we were talking about the underlying cost structure. Chapter 6, departmental costing, we're going to apply these concepts at department level, 7 to the actual service level. So, this is a very important page. You're going to get quizzed on this point in the midterm. The ultimate goal of cost allocation is costing at the service line or individual service test procedure level so that managers can establish prices for those services. Okay? That's the ultimate goal. Remember it. And that's why we're going to have departmental costing, we're going to have service line costing, and then we're going to talk about pricing. So there's a certain order and flow to the design. Okay, so again, we discussed costs in relationship to to volume, and now we're going to talk about costs in relationship to a specific department. So direct, those are costs incurred by a specific department, whatever it is. Housekeeping, operating room, ER, benefits department, audit the X-ray department, the MRI department. Indirect, or what they call overhead, are costs associated with shared resources used, primarily by the entire organization. So, housekeeping has direct costs that it has in cleaning materials and labor, but it as a whole is a cost, a departmental cost that the entire organization uses. So, from the perspective, let's say, of the operating room, the OR department, they have labor, they have supplies, they have gas, implants. Those are direct costs. But their employees use HR services. The department uses billing services to bill for the services. They use housekeeping to clean. They use materials management resources to buy their supplies. So from the perspective of the operating room, those type of things are indirect costs because those same departments, housekeeping, billing, finance, payroll, they also provide to other departments. So let's just think about it. For the purpose of this, we're talking about direct and indirect. And again, fixed and variable is a separate categorization, and they can be either, right? So you can have direct from the perspective of the laboratory department, the lab director, the space, the equipment. It's a direct cost of the lab, but it's also a fixed cost because it doesn't change with volume. From the perspective of the lab, the central registration manager, insurance verification, the registration department, if they serve, you know, a variety of outpatient departments, they're indirect from the perspective of the lab. and they're also fixed because by their nature it doesn't increase with volume. Variable, direct lab supplies. Again, supplies, they're direct to the lab. They're variable because they increase with volume. Now, a lot of these services, when you do insurance verification, you pay, I don't know what it used to be, I don't know, 10, 15 cents for every patient that insurance was verified in these clearinghouses and online intermediary type companies. So you scan the insurance card and it goes out to the web or now, and then it says yes, this person has insurance, it's active, and I don't know, maybe it's a nickel now, but it's an indirect cost from the perspective of the lab because they don't pay for it. It's a registration cost that all the services use. But it's also variable because it's x pennies per usage. More volume, the more the charges. So I just want to frame it up. We're not going to worry about fixed and variable for the next couple of chapters. We're just going to talk about direct and indirect. But I just want you to know they're not mutually exclusive. It's like a matrix. Okay, so the goal of departmental allocation, not the overall goal of allocation per se, but the specific goal of departmental allocation is to assign these overhead costs for these, let's call them service departments, to the patient departments so that we can then get to our ultimate goal, which is to get it to the service level, test level, so we can price. Ultimate goal is to be able to price. So the overhead departments are typically called cost centers, while the patient service or the clinical departments at an institution might be called revenue centers because, for example, in a hospital, the obviously the finance and the payroll department don't bill customers for their services provided to the internal staff, but the OR and the lab and the OB and the ER does. Okay, so why do we do cost allocation? Well, you can't manage what you don't measure, right? That's just basic kind of management 101. Um, we want to be able to manage it. We want to be able to minimize our costs. A lot of pressure in healthcare today on declining reimbursement. We have to manage those costs. Again, the ultimate goal so that we can price our services. And we need to know our costs in order to do that. Another another issue, certainly in the physician space, is stark fraud and abuse compliance regulatory issues. So, when I was CEO of this very large orthopedic group, we had, in addition to the clinical work, the surgery centers, we had an MRI department, durable medical equipment, and physical therapy business. And I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of stark fraud and abuse, but there are certain allocations of profit with respect to these lines of businesses. They have to be shared equally for the most part. You can't allocate profit on these ancillary lines of business based on the physician's referral. And so, in order to come up with the profit of each center, you have to allocate certain overhead, my time, billings time, space, to these departments in a rational way, so that if the feds ever came in, you need to show them how you allocated these costs, show them that it was done in a fair, reasonable manner, so that you weren't manipulating it to, you know, get around stark fraud and abuse issues. Medicare, we're going to talk about that in a second. At the hospital level, they actually require the step down method, which we'll talk about in a second. So, this is really going to be done in the finance department, the mechanics of it. What you have to understand, you're going to get some homework problems on spreadsheets doing this, at least the direct method. You're never going to have to do it again, the actual mechanics of it. But I think in doing the mechanics of it in a very, very simple example, you'll understand it more intuitively. When I first did this, literally 40 years ago, I did it in the kind of spreadsheets that you're going to see for an entire hospital, for every department, because that's the way we did it back then. And prior to spreadsheets, I, 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 I guess people did it with calculators or just didn't do it at all. The hospital that I was finance director of, they had never done any of it. They didn't. I mean, it didn't have the tools to do it or the expertise. But there are, aside from the math, there are concepts that you need to know because you could be on a project team and that is defining the parameters for how this is done, not the actual math. So I'm not going to test you on anything that you're likely to never do again. So that's the good news. And allocation, the physical act of the math, is not something that you'll ever do again, because there's software to do it now. So the first thing you have to understand, the first step, is to understand the concept of a cost pool. So this is testable. It's very important. And regardless of what computer system they use, this is something that a manager of a clinical area may be part of a committee or project team to discuss. So the cost pool is the cost of the overhead amount, the dollar cost of the overhead amount that's to be allocated. Okay. So typically, they're the direct costs of the overhead department of finance, housekeeping, payroll, human resources, etc. Direct costs may be a little strong if we get to step down, but let's not get too pedantic. Typically, you have one cost pool, finance department. However, depending on how the organization is, you may subdivide a cost pool into separate cost pools that are allocated differently. So, for example, you might have a billing and collection services cost pool within finance, financial reporting, budgeted services cost pool within finance. So you can have multiple cost pools. For our purposes, we're just going to have one cost pool per department. And the reason you would have multiple is you might allocate the cost differently. So billing and collection services, You might just allocate it by revenue or by the number of bills. The reporting and budgeting services, maybe you do that by I don't know, maybe the expenses of the department, maybe head count, something of that nature. Okay, so the cost pool is the dollar amount that's going to be allocated. The cost driver is the basis on which the cost pool will be allocated. Okay, so pool is the dollar amount, driver is the basis on which we will allocate that. So, for example, building occupancy, you might do it by the amount of space. Depreciation, maintenance, utilities, all those things. HR might be the number of employees. So the driver is, in this case, employees. Housekeeping, you might do it on space. Probably better is to do it on labor hours to the extent those are tracked. So, what are the attributes? So, this is probably the most important slide for you for this lecture because, again, even if the dollars are kind of given, to the extent you're on a committee or you're questioning, you're have, you're a general manager of a department, you're being allocated costs from the accountants. You you need to know this. So this is the most important slide for your purposes in the entire lecture. So the cost driver, it should create an allocation of the cost pool that's highly correlated with the actual amount of overhead used by the revenue department, right? So the more overhead services consumed, the greater the allocation. Kind of makes sense. So effective cost drivers will have these three important attributes. And the first two are kind of the official in any accounting, you know, AI search you're going to find. The third one is kind of my practical experience. The first one is the cost driver should be perceived as logical and fair. Okay, it's got to be fair. So allocating HR department costs by number of employees is probably more fair than doing it by patient service revenue, right? Because there's a direct correlation. Allocating housekeeping area cost by square foot is not bad, but labor hours would be better. Why? Because to the extent you track those labor hours, it's a fair representation of what that department uses. Example, the OR department has the same square footage as the physical therapy department. Well, it's going to be a hell of a lot more costly to clean the ORs than it is to clean the physical therapy. Some physical therapy, maybe somebody comes down once a day or maybe a couple times a day and wipes down the equipment and vacuums. OR, a whole different story, right? Cleaning between, even if the OR team is doing the turnaround, you know, at night you're doing a way more extensive clean than just wiping down the equipment. So the second point, the driver should promote overall organizational cost reduction. So this confuses students. We're not, by this we mean the managers as a whole will be more prudent about using the resources of the support department if they're being charged for it in a rational way. Now, this is unrelated to the amount that's specifically allocated. In other words, it's not your department specific. You're not choosing an allocation method that lowers the cost to your department just on principle. No, that's not how it works. You don't get to choose a driver by, well, this will reduce my costs. This is the overall organizational reduction. So the perfect example here is again the 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 housekeeping. So let's say that the amount allocated to your department is based on revenue because somebody said, well, you can afford it. Well, you're not going to do anything to reduce your revenue to lower your allocation costs. That would be dumb. Let's say it's done by square footage. Well, you can't change your square footage. So, eh. Let's say that it's allocated, housekeeping is allocated by labor hours. Okay. Now you kind of have an incentive. Hey, maybe team, we don't need to leave the place so messy for housekeeping. Maybe in our downtime, we could do a little cleaning ourselves, right? OR team in between cases, or we got a gap in the schedule. Well, let's help out the housekeeping team do some of our own cleaning. So in doing so, you're lowering the housekeeping department's costs, and you're lowering the cost for you and for everybody. So you're promoting organizational cost reduction. So again, you're going to be more incentivized if it's something like labor hours charged to you to reduce those labor hours than if it's square footage. You could do the same thing. You could have your team help clean up, but you're still going to be allocated based on square footage, so there's less of an incentive. Now, the Dave thing is a juice worth the squeeze. So, in the old days, you know, maybe you didn't keep track of labor hours by department because it was just too burdensome, right? I worked at a major institution in 2006 that was still using time cards. The hospital where I was finance director in the 80s, we got rid of time cards and went to badges to swipe in, like in the 80s. Well, if I'm doing time cards and I don't have you know, and all I'm getting is start time and break and lunch and, break and end time, it for my housekeeping department, it's going to be hard to track potentially, how much time they spent in the OR versus the physical therapy department. So back then, it might have just been, look, we'll just do it by square footage. But once you put in a badge system and you have a reader, the person could swipe into the just have them swipe into the OR and swipe out of the OR when they're done, and then it's all tracked behind the scene. So you just have to weigh the costs and benefits. In my kind of career, I've had physicians, they wanted me to track a bunch of stuff, and I'm like, guys, it's going to be a lot of work. You're going to look at it once, you're going to lose interest and be bored with it, and you're not going to take any action on it anyway. And at the end of the day, I mean, come on. And so you really just have to think about, is the effort worth, the payoff? or is payoff worth the effort? Now, again, this is a lot of has been mitigated with modern cost accounting systems tied to EMRs, and you know, a lot of stuff can just be tracked behind the scenes, but it's still, I think, something to consider. So, again, and I've every semester I've taught this, I've had at least a few students make this error. Do not make this mistake. If you're asked which do you think is more fair or which you think is better in an essay, I think allocating HR costs by square feet is better than allocating HR costs by number of employees because it allocates less to my department. No, no. This isn't about what's fairness is how much is allocated to your department is not a criteria of fairness. The method by which it is what's determines fair. Okay? Do not make judgments based on the cost driver allocates more or less. Okay? What are the most important? Logic and fairness, organizational cost reduction. Those are the two key ones. The is the juice worth the squeeze? That's something to consider. But the most important one are this concept of logical and fair and promotes organizational. So here's answers from previous classes. It's unfair because the ER got charged more. No. Again, I can't make this any more clear. The new method is unfair because the ER got charged more by allocating more billing costs by square feet. No. I mean, again, it's not square feet is a silly way to allocate billing costs, but the reason it's silly isn't because it allocated more costs. The reason it's silly is because there's no real logical or fairness to allocate billing by square foot. There's no relationship between the two. It doesn't promote organizational costing. But the answer the student gave was, well, because it allocated more. Uh, the last one, the new allocation method is unfair because the square footage is unrelated to the true cost of providing billing and collection services. A better method would be collections or number of bills sent. Yes. Okay. Now, they said it was unfair because there was no relationship. So if you get this question or you get a similar one, be the first class where none of the students make these mistakes. Okay? Can't emphasize this enough because these are actual answers. And it seems to me pretty clear that I made this point. Okay, so allocation methods. Again, we're allocating overhead departments to patient service department. So there's three basic methods: direct method, step down method, the reciprocal method. Direct method, the costs of each department are allocated directly to and only to the patient service departments. So we go from support department directly to patient service. In the step down method, we recognize that there's interdepartmental relationships are more complex than that. And so we may allocate some service department costs to other service department costs that then get allocated to patient service departments. We'll see that in a slide. The reciprocal method is we're recognizing all the interdepartmental relationships. it requires like recursive techniques of calculation. You cannot do it on spreadsheets. You can do it with modern accounting systems, but at some point, I'm wondering if we have a juice versus squeeze issue. So let's kind of see it in a nice graphic from the textbook. So, direct human resources gets allocated to physical therapy and internal medicine. Housekeeping, direct. Let's do the step down. The step down, human resources gets allocated to physical therapy, internal medicine, and to housekeeping and to administration. The housekeeping, with its additional allocation, gets allocated to PT and internal medicine and administration. Administration, which its allocations from housekeeping and human resources, then it gets allocated to physical therapy and internal medicine. And in the reciprocal method, it's kind of just all happening at once. The step down method requires a hierarchy. You have to determine which order it's done. The reciprocal method, it's there's no hierarchy. You just establish these complex relationships, let the computer run overnight, and there you have it. So again, because it is an important concept. Let's go over it again. Sorry. Direct HR to internal medicine to PT, housekeeping internal medicine PT, administration internal medicine PT. Step down. HR to housekeeping, admin, and internal and PT. Housekeeping to admin, internal medicine, PT. Admin, internal medicine, and PT. The key is the hierarchy, which is the logical method. And the reciprocal just uses simultaneous ones. There's no hierarchy. Okay, so how do we do this? Let's lay out the steps. Step one, step zero, as always, we would lay out the assumptions neatly in a table format in an Excel model. We're going to do this in Excel. The traditional then, we step one is identify the cost pools. What are the dollars going to be allocated, right? Number two is the driver, the cost driver. Again, logic and fairness, organizational cost reduction. Again, let's sneak in the third one. Is it worth the benefit? A quick anecdote. When I was with Hinsdale Orthopedics, we allocated space to the various departments, PT, MRI, kind of using a direct method, clinical space, MRI, DME. With respect to the physicians, if you think of each physician as its own revenue center, and for purposes of determining their salary and everything else, we in fact did that. So think of each physician as its own patient service department. We allocated space, for example, just we had a generic formula for kind of overhead, and the it was kind of blended. So we had what, 7 offices, and some the rent was really high. Physician office building on a hospital campus probably is going to be your highest rent, and we had one in a strip mall, a nice strip mall. We had a building, 2 buildings that we owned, and then etc. And so we didn't make a distinction on the cost of the facilities based on where the physician practice. So the physicians who practiced mainly out of the professional office building that was high rent, they were allocated the same as the other physicians in the lower rent space. And the reason for that is we when they came in, we kind of assigned them based on the need. We and so if we had a need in the area with the in well, Silver Cross Hospital where we had an office on campus. If we had a need, we sent them there. Didn't really seem fair. Oh, by the way, you're going to pay more rent than the doctors in the building that we own. We sent you there. Okay, so anyway, long story short, president of the group and I go to visit this Atlanta group, kind of collegial type stuff. He was in medical school with one of the guys. They allocated everything specific to physicians. They allocated differences in I mean they allocated everything. I mean we front desk and that kind of stuff. We kind of had a blended formula. It was just kind of a general overhead bucket. They allocated all these specific costs. And I'm not saying what was right or wrong. I can just tell you, I had like two people in accounting. I was basically the CEO, CFO. I had some outsourced accountants that did our bank recs, did the physician statements just for specific reasons. They had an army of accountants. They had a room of accountants. And I don't know, were they better off allocating everything to the penny to each physician at the cost of a room full of accountants? I don't know the answer to that. I'm guessing that maybe not. That the cost of doing that was just too much. But I don't know. Maybe it worked for them. Okay, so the step three is calculate the allocation rate. So the allocation rate is the dollars in the cost pool divided by the total volume of the driver, right? And then we determine the allocation amount. We apply that rate to the specific department's driver. I'll be clear in a second. Step five, DK always has a check your work step. I'm big on checking your work. So let's say we have this example. You get into this hospital, it's pretty simple. It's a rural hospital. It's just got facilities, and we have general administration as everything else, and we have a critical care, and we have a routine care. Very simple example. So we have some facts here, and you get in there and you're like, we should allocate costs. Okay. So my step one would be to lay out the assumptions in a neat table format. We'll get there. If you want to do this on the back of an envelope, identify the cost pool. Facilities cost pool is 8.6 million. GA is 5.2. The drivers we've said is for facilities is the amount of space. Just to give an example, used by each of the patient service departments. So 39 and change, 261 and change. So the total, the driver for the facilities cost pool is the amount of space. That's 300,600. The cost driver for general administration, we decide is the amount of revenue generated. Not the greatest driver in my opinion, but often used because it's easy. And if it's unsophisticated, at least it's some measure. So the revenue was 27 million total, adding up the two. So then we calculate the rates. We take our 8.6 million for facilities divided by the 300,000 plus square feet equals $28.61 a square foot. General administration, your 5.2 million cost pool divided by your 27 million driver is 19.4 cents per dollar of revenue. And then we take those allocation amounts times the driver for each department. So the facilities has 30 critical care has 39,600 square feet times the $28.61 rate. They get allocated 1.1 million and change. From facilities for general administration, they have 5 million in revenue times the 19.4 cents, $972,000 in change. Routine care gets 261 times 2861 for 7.4 million. From facilities, it bears that much of the cost. General administration costs, it's 22 million. Routines revenue times 19.4 cents, it gets allocated 4.7 million. And then we check our math as always. Facilities, does the amount allocated, the amount of the cost pool less the allocation equals zero. So facilities started with 8.6, they allocated 1.1 to critical care, 7.4 to routine care, equals zero. Same with general administration. So we're checking it. So we can make this a little simpler. So let's this is Excel is your friend. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up the Excel model, but for purpose of the lecture notes, they're there. Um, if you don't necessarily want to go back and watch the video, a couple of very important components. The homework you're going to ask to be done, do a P&L. We won't quite do it in this format, but there'll be a template. So if you set up a nice orderly spreadsheet like this, and we'll pull up the spreadsheet in a second. It's a lot simpler than trying to keep a bunch of scribbles on back of envelopes. And these are kind of the formulas. So the one thing I want you to, you're not to embed any assumptions in any formulas. So you see we have our blue numbers. Those are our assumptions, and then everything else is math. You don't need to be embedding any hard code any assumptions in anything where there's an equal. So let's pull it up in Excel and just kind of go through it. So here's our example. Let me sorry. Okay, sorry about that. Try and make it a little bigger. Okay, so step 0, we do our neat orderly table where we lay out all the data. We've got our assumptions in blue. We have this nice table here, and we're going to keep track of everything. So we've laid out our assumptions in blue. There's no revenue for the facilities. These are directly from the assumptions, direct costs, critical care, etc. We have our square foot. Okay? So, facilities. We label our driver. We're going to do it by square footage. We identified our cost pool. We link it. We link it to the eight to the cost pool facilities. We don't type in 8.6 because then we're not building a model. And it's easier to say equal B7 than it is to type 8.6. I can do it much faster. The cost driver, we've identified it as square feet. Okay. Um, okay. So critical care we link to the number of square feet in critical care. We link to the number of square foot in routine care. It's all laid out. You can show this to somebody, they would exactly know what you were doing. We total the two. We get our allocation rate by dividing 8.6 C15 divided by C19. Okay? We apply those allocation rates equal C20. You can equal D17. You can do equal D20. It doesn't really matter. You're picking up the same rate. And then we're applying it. B17 times D17 equals the amount allocated. D18 times B18 equals the amount allocated. We total them, make sure they total 8.6. We do the DK step. Cost to be allocated. We wanted to allocate 8.6 million. We add those two together, they should equal 0. Okay, then what I do, facilities. What did I allocate? I subtract the 8.6 million that I allocated, and this should total 0. Okay. I've checked my work by doing that. Critical care department. Ultimately, we want to do a profit and loss statement, right? So we pick up what did it get from what did it get indirect costs from the facilities department? It got E17. Routine care got E18. Okay? And then we summed across here. So what it showed was we took away 8.6 here, we added it here, should net to 0. We like it when we check our work. General administration. We're doing it by revenue. We've noted that. Revenue. We're very anal about this because if you were to do a large problem, it's easy to get lost and get confused. Our cost pool equals C7. Picked up that. Critical care equal D6. Routine care D7 or E7, sorry. We're linking because it's quicker to link than to type, and we don't embed assumptions. Because what if somebody said, "Oh, by the way, we made a mistake. It's really 23 million." Everything right, or 2.3 million. Then it's done. You don't have to change, or sorry, 23 million. You get the point. 23 million. We made a mistake. It's 23 million. then we're done. Everything just works. We don't have to worry about figuring out where we hard coded that. Okay, again, so we get our total revenue, B26 plus B27, the allocation rate, C24 divided by C28. We apply the allocation rates by linking, and we take the revenue times the rate for every dollar of revenue, that 19.4 cents. I think I'm fooling you. We do that math, we apply it, we total the costs. What did we want to allocate? We subtract. You can do it to here if you want. We want to allocate this much money. We did. We total the two. We get 0, 0. We say, what did we allocate? We allocated that. We total this. We get 0. So we allocated those dollars out. We took them to here. Sum across should be 0, right? And now we have a P&L for each department. And that should total to what we started with in total. So, critical care, quote unquote, lost 400,000, routine care made 1.9 under this model. So, again, for the homework, just follow these steps. Link, don't embed assumptions. So I'm going to move this here. So now let's, very straightforward. Now let's do the step down method. We assume the cost drivers are the same, but we have an extra step because we're going to allocate one of the support departments to another department. The key is the hierarchy, which is more logical. I determining the hierarchy, I've struggled with this. Which department provides more service to which? It's really difficult to. It's more experience and seeing what folks do. I really try to struggle with how to define hierarchy, and I've never come up with a way to do it other than experience. I think the important thing is there's a section if you want to read it on Medicare. Put if you have insomnia, but when you do cost reports in Medicare, I've pulled out from the PDF. Uh, Again, this is an official CMS document. It recognizes services of non-revenue producing departments to other non-revenue departments, and these the non-revenue producing departments, the greatest number of other centers are receiving the benefits from the least number of centers is apportioned first. So that's how they're trying to tell you to do the hierarchy. I'll tell you what, every hospital that I know to do their cost reports, they get a consultant. I have a friend that's spent her whole career doing nothing but cost reports. The practical meaning of this is that you're not going to see a lot of reciprocal methods in practice because people are just going to use the required Medicare step down method. You're not going to have one for internal and one for Medicare reporting. It'd just be nuts. So the step down method is kind of by default. And now, because this hierarchy issue is how do you really explain it? You know, CMS has the greatest number and the least number, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to test you on it, but the salient point is there has to be a hierarchy established. How are you going to go, kind of facilities to general admin to patient services? Are you going to go general admin to facilities? And you can imagine with 30 support departments, it gets complicated fast. So the step down largely the same, but you have an extra uh, step, for lack of a better word. You have to factor in what gets allocated from the other service department. So in this simple example, we're going to establish the hierarchy as facilities to general. So if we go through, and we'll just focus mainly on the spreadsheet because it's a lot simpler to see it. So the general administration cost pool, we're going to allocate some facilities cost to general administration. So general administration then is going to get allocated its direct costs plus what it gets from facilities. So if we follow the same example as before, what we're doing is the square footage goes up because we're adding in the 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 general administration square footage for that driver, right? So we're going to lower the allocation rate that we calculated under the direct method because we're also allocating 15,000 square feet of um, of its from facilities. Uh, Now there's revenue. There is no revenue, right? Um, from facilities or general administration. So that basically um, doesn't change as far as the cost driver. However, when we go from our allocation rates, we have to remember that our general administration picked up those extra costs from facilities. And so this is here if you want to look at it, it just gets too confusing. So let's just pull it up in Excel because it's just a heck of a lot easier to look at it in Excel. Okay, so we started with facilities and we're going to step down. So we're stepping facilities down to general administration. So our cost pool for facilities is the same, but we have that extra 15,000 square feet from general administration to determine our allocation rate. So we're taking the same 8.6, but we're dividing it by effectively 315,600 instead of the prior one, which was 300,600. And again, we're not embedding any numbers. We're using the power of Excel to do the math for us. Okay, so now the rate is 27.25. So that's the first thing. The rate has been lowered because from 28 to 27.25 because we have more square footage. Now what we have to do, we have to allocate some of facilities costs to general administration. So it's the same basic philosophy. We take the allocation rate times the driver and we do the allocation to each. And again, what did we want to allocate? We wanted to allocate 8.6. What did we total up? We do the math to check our work. Now here, when I've given this as a homework assignment, this is the step that the students miss. We then have to add that 408,000 that we allocated from facilities to the general administration cost pool. So we now the general administration cost pool is 5.6 million and change instead of 5.2 because we've stepped down. We've taken that and we stepped it down to general administration. Um, and the pool has increased. And then we do the same thing. We take our drivers. Now the allocation rate is 21 cents instead of 19.4. So this one went down. This one went down because you're dividing it by more. This one went up because you're adding the step down amount. Okay, and then again, we're doing the allocation, the math, rate times driver. We're totaling it. What did we want to do? You can take it from there. You can take it from there, just as long as you're keeping track. And then we like to do this. Okay, we had no revenue. Whoops, I want to do that. All right, we had no revenue. We allocated 8.6, so we total that. General administration, we started with our 5. We picked up the 408,000. Then we allocated out the 5.6. These should total to 0 because why? Because we don't want any costs left in there. We want the costs all moved over to critical care and routine care. And then critical care got the million and change from facilities. Routine care got the 7.1 million and change from facilities. Critical care got a million and change from GA. Routine care got 4.6 million and change from GA. Okay, total them across, we get 0. That helps us. You can still screw it up, but it at least helps you know that you've tied out and accounted for all the numbers. And now we have our profit and loss. So a lot easier to do it with Excel. So we're stepping down, right? We're stepping down to there. Note what I did, keeping track of the numbers, making sure we tied to 0, etc. So what I'm going to do is the I would review. You should review putting cost accounting to work. Kanzler Spence, October 20th. PDF for additional insight on modern cost accounting methods and applications. That all this that that was a I used to have that guy do a demo for us. He's no longer with them, but that's a good overview of a modern accounting system. You're going to see some of the all these systems are built on these concepts. They're just way more sophisticated in their application in a modern institution to handle hundreds of departments and tie into the general ledger and the EMR and the accounting system, the swipe cards, the HR time and attendance. But at the core, they're doing this basic thing. If you, I'm going to do a separate video. If you want some more examples, I'll do these in a separate little video. It's kind of an optional. If you want some more info on it, you are gonna have a direct costing problem. it's pretty straightforward if you follow the lecture notes and the templates. So I'm going to wrap it up here and then do a separate little video for the appendix.